Hey guys, Kitchen Table Magician here. Welcome to an episode of Strange Brew, series where I pick out an obscure, rare, or uncommon, and that's something that's not real obvious, that when you look at it, you're not quite sure what to do, and you got to do some thinking about it. And then we try and build a deck around that. Today's featured card is New Perspectives. This is from Amonkhet. It costs 6 mana. One of them is blue. It's an enchantment that reads, when New Perspectives enters the battlefield, draw 3 cards. As long as you have 7 or more cards in hand, you may pay 0 rather than pay cycling costs. Alright, so here's the thing about Amonkhet. As the cards were being previewed and spoiled, and I was looking at all the new things coming out, the new mechanics were okay. I mean, Embalm's okay. Exert's alright. You can do some crazy things with Exert if you combo the cards right. But what I got most excited about wasn't the new mechanics. It was this old cycling mechanic. I think this is the 4th time we've seen it. It was debuted in Urza's Saga originally, and I do have an original Urza's Saga cycling land here, but there were other cards too. In Urza's Saga, everything that cycled generically cycled for 2, and there were no other little side things with it. It was just a way to pilfer through your deck a little bit. And I always thought that the lands were the best. The great thing about being able to cycle lands is you can get rid of mana flood later in the game. When you don't need to be drawing lands, you can draw into your cycling lands and discard them and move on to other things. So that's where I've always felt cycling is the best. But then it came back in Onslaught block, and they stepped it up a little bit so that you could cycle and get a few little abilities. And like some of them said, if you cycle, gain a couple of life. If you cycle, you could have your opponent lose some life. Cycle, draw, go get a basic land. I mean, there were all kinds of little tweaks to that. So Onslaught block had some really cool cycling. And then we saw it again in Time Spiral block. And again, they ramped it up a little and made it so it was, you could do things with the cards when you cycle them. I think that's all. No, you know what? It was in Shards of Alara too. There was some cycling there too. Anyway, it's a very, very powerful mechanic. One I've always enjoyed. And when I saw this card, I knew I wanted to build a deck around this. So today's episode, we're going to try and break New Perspectives. So before I really get into the build, I just want to demonstrate the silly powerfulness of what you can do with cycling and how quickly you can go through your deck. So let's assume for demonstration purposes, I've gotten myself to 6 mana, I'm alive, and I've drawn my New Perspectives, and I've got a hand of cards here. Okay? What I'm going to do, and I still have my deck sitting here, right? I'm going to go ahead and tap out and play my New Perspectives. I will be drawing my 3 cards, right? Loading my hand up. And I have a whole handful of cycling. So let me show you something silly here. I can cycle for free because I have 7 or more cards in hand. So I cycle, draw, cycle, draw, cycle, draw, cycle, draw, and so on and so forth. This is a huge, okay, I can't cycle that. It's a land, so I'll just move on to this and cycle. Or it's a land. Okay, I'll cycle that away. There's another card I can cycle. Okay, so you can see the engine here. There is an engine here, and there are ways to just completely abuse this. So I just wanted to demonstrate what we're trying to do with the deck as far as an engine goes. This is a cycling engine. Now I'm going to break the deck down and show you how to play around with this and build something very funky and cool. So there are several things you can do with this, and I've wrapped a lot of it into one deck, and I have some fun playing with it. So obviously you go get yourself a playset of New Perspectives, which I have done. I actually managed to pull a foily out of a booster pack. So we start there, because that's our build around. Then we want to be able to cycle a lot of cards. Hieroglyphic Illumination, Amonkhet, cycles for 1 blue, that's key. Being able to cycle away for one mana is really good early in the game, because you're not going to get to New Perspectives until about turn 6, probably. So you still want to be able to just cycle and draw, as cheaply as you can. So looking for cards that only cycle for 1 mana is really good. But later, if you need to ramp up and just cast it out to get the 2-card draw, that's great. As a common goes, this is probably the best blue common in Amonkhet, in my opinion. This is a really good card. Vizier of Tumbling Sands. This works double duty for you. It cycles, or if you need some board presence, it's only 3 mana. It's a 1/3, so it can sit and muddle up the board. And it's potential mana ramp. You can actually untap some lands with it, so you could get into your New Perspectives on maybe turn 5 instead of 6, if you have one of these on the table. So that works double duty for you. Censor is in here because it's a nice early game counterspell. You can stall up an aggro deck if you need to. And it cycles for only 1 blue, so later in the game when it's no longer relevant, you just cycle it away. Alright, then we have Horror of the Broken Lands. This one I very rarely cast. It does cost 5, but if I need to get grindy and get into a mid-game because other things that I want aren't happening, then I can do that. He's 4/4, so he's big. He gets bigger when you cycle. He cycles for 1 black, so he cycles out cheaply. So this deck has the ability to get into the trenches and get grindy if it's not doing the other things you want it to do. Wasteland Scorpion, this is really good value. 3 mana, Death Touch, 2/2. So all by itself, that's pretty fair. And then he cycles out for 2. So a play set of those. Again, you can get some board state if you need to stabilize a little bit earlier in the game so that you can stay alive longer to finish the game. These will do that for you. So there's lots of board state here and grindy ways to get grindy against opponents. Shimmer Scale Drake. Again, I rarely cast this because it does take 5, but it cycles away for 2, and if you need it later in the game, you do have it. I run 3. River Serpent. 5/5 for 6. Again, rarely cast this, but he cycles away for 1 blue, so that's really, really good. If you do need to cast him and run with him, he can't attack unless there are 5 or more cards in your graveyard, but trust me, by the time you cast this guy, there's going to be cards in your graveyard. So, now that we've done all this cycling and we've got all this stuff in our deck to cycle through, what do we do with all that? Well, I started with Ruthless Sniper, because I tried to build kind of a combo deck, but like I said, this thing can trench out too and just get into creature combat if you have to. And this is one way to stay alive. This is a nice early 1-drop. When you cycle or discard a card, put a -1/-1 counter. You got to pay a mana. And then if you do, put a -1/-1 counter on a target creature. So if you have a couple of these guys on the table and you cycle a card, you can distribute 2 -1/-1 counters just by paying 2 mana. And if you're going through this with New Perspectives on the table and your cycling costs are free, well then all your mana is available to you to trigger the snipers. So I run 4. And these guys are really, really good at just pinning down your opponent's board and taking care of that really aggressive stuff that's goes on over there. Also, I only have 1 of these. This is worth picking up a couple more copies, I think, to flesh out my deck. Only costs 5. Flying, whenever you cycle or discard a card for... you can put a -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponent controls, and you don't have to pay anything to do that. It's just a trigger. He also cycles himself, and he's a 5/4 flyer. So this is what I mean by getting into the late grindy game. You can grind your opponent out with these kinds of things. I definitely want to find at least 1, maybe 2 more of these for the deck. Also, in the interest of keeping my hand full, I do have a pair of Trial of Knowledges, but I will probably take these out because I'm finding that I don't really need them. They're not that necessary. The New Perspectives do the job all by themselves. So I'll probably take these out, probably put in a couple more Archfiends, but for now they're here. Then I have another later game Beat Stick when I get to that phase of the game. 4 mana, 4/4 flyer. When you cycle or discard another card, scry 1. It's a free thing that just triggers. You don't have to pay for it. And he does cycle himself. So I have 1 of these just because I have it. So win conditions, like absolute win conditions when you really just want to finish the game. I pulled a Kefner the Mindful, so I play with this. Keeping your hand at 7, not a big deal in this deck. It's very easy to do. Flying Indestructible, 5/5. He allows you to draw cards, and return lands to your hand, so you can fill your hand back up with this guy to enable him a little bit if you have to. Very hard to deal with this. But then, if you wanted to combo off, this deck can do that too. And there's another card in Amonkhet that I was really excited about when I saw it, and I knew I wanted to do a brew session with that. So it turns out we're going to do a 2-for-1, with New Perspectives being the first card, and then the second one being Approach of the Second Sun. these actually play very, very well together. If you can do things correctly, you should be able to cast Approach of the Second Sun, and then when you bury it, it goes in 7 cards from the top. You should be able to draw Approach of the Second Suns the very next turn. If this deck is firing like it's supposed to, you should be able to cast Approach of the Second Suns 2 turns in a row, and the game is over just like that. But if you can't get that to happen, this deck has plenty of other ways to win and get grindy and get down in the trenches. So that's what I like about it. It can play many, many different ways. I also am a big fan of the cycling dual lands. I only have 2 of them right now, so to really flesh this deck out, I'd like to find 3 more copies of each of the Irrigated Farmland and Fetid Pools. But for now, I just have some placeholders in the form of some old Urza's Saga cycling lands and a Vivid Marsh, just so I can get into the Approach of the Second Sun. So that would be what would really flesh this deck out. A full cycle of each of these cycling dual lands and a couple more of that, what is he, the Archdemon something? Yeah, Archfiend of Ifner. A couple more of these. That would really flesh this deck out. So I hope you've enjoyed this brew. If you like this video, click the like button, leave some comments at the bottom if you've got other ideas, things that might be able to improve this, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.